I've been thinking about the French school system for a long time, and it was a ways back, but in 2018 I decided to do education sciences because there's something wrong with the French school system, and I've always wanted to know exactly what and if there's a solution to the problem. So I've realized several things since then. The first one is that France has essentially socialized its education, which means that education is a monopoly that works for the state. That's the first thing I've realized. And the second thing I've realized is that there's been enormous inflation when it comes to grades. Essentially, on one side, students can't use basic things like the country's language and like math and science. They don't understand these things at all. They have no classes about epistemology. They have no classes, well, they have classes, but the classes have no rigor, and without rigor, they don't do anything properly. And on the other side, many students still get the diplomas despite the fact that they're unqualified and their level is really low. So on one side, they're unqualified, and on the other side, they still get the diploma, which makes the diploma completely worthless. And what I've realized is that the problem does not extend to being a monopoly, which means that you can't bring a solution from outside, and at the same time, it's self-destructing because there's inflation. And the third thing I've realized since then is that universities, which select the teachers and essentially kind of build the curriculum, uh, are either completely they don't seem to care, or they care but for the wrong things. For example, in France, there is no such thing as curriculum. They talk about programs, but the programs don't have useful ends. They're all made for ideological purposes. I- in fact, in France, most education things are done for ideological purposes. For example, uh, students in most countries are set in groups according to their level, so they can actually have content that's adapted to their needs. But in France, classes are not made like that at all. If they're groups by level, the groups are more or less they're done. Well, they're done in an not in an official way, but they're still done. They're still groups. Like for example, I have students that I work with. They aren't very good classes, but the classes are not good per se. They're good because they have students that are good, and the students that are good, well, they pick certain options that gets them out of those bad classes, and also the parents get involved so that the students get help. Whereas bad students, there's no help coming for them, and nobody cares, so they eternally stay in bad classes. So another blatant problem is the fact that there is no synchronization between the education system and employment. So people they'll study a long time, they'll do a degree, and there's no real like usefulness in the degree, and nobody really seems to care, at least at at the university, because there's this idea that education is very important, but nobody can really tell you what education is, and nobody can agree about what education is for. So we've got all these conflicting ends that come into education, and the results are completely bonkers. Like there's no like logic to anything. It's kind of like when well, in the US, like parents realized that people were teaching their children things that they didn't agree at all with. Like there was a value clash. But in France, education, there is no value clash, but people still let other people teach crazy things in classrooms. So, well, these are some problems I've seen in the French education system, and I'll probably talk about more of them. I would like to talk about something else. For example, in France, they love subjects that are not really subjects. So they'll stick together things that don't really go together, in an attempt to save time, but in the end, it's more confusing and stupid than it should be. For example, they take biology and geology and they put them together into a new thing that has no real because these are different sciences with different epistemologies that study different fields. They don't have the same basic fundamentals, but they're still put together. And in France, they do that with almost everything. So it becomes a confusing mess. And later on, when you actually do these things at a high level, uh, most students, they're still stuck at in the bad mindset that was given to them when they started out. So even students that are successful are still handicapped by the system in itself. They have to kind of unlearn the bad structure that was given to the education, and also they have to take the knowledge that was given to them in an unclear, stupid way, and they have to r- learn how to like reconfigure it in a useful and in a coherent and an effective way. So education in France is often it's often counterproductive in many ways, and it has to be undone so it can be done properly. And either it's undone by the student or it's undone by somebody else. But when the student is alone, especially if he's from a poor background, uh, that means no help is coming for him. And that means he'll have a huge handicap despite the fact he spent 12 years at school. So it's kind of a very problematic thing. But there's no solution to this, at least none that I see that's easy to implement. But I wanted to talk about all of this, so goodbye and see you later.